Good morning. My name is Roy Flanagan. I'm an agriculture agent in the city of Virginia Beach. I've been with Extension about 10 years. We're currently growing our 22nd crop of strawberries, and I'm here today to talk to you about annual plasticulture strawberry production. This presentation was one that Dr. Alan Straw and I gave back in 2017 at a new growers workshop, and normally takes about 2.5, 3 hours to present this information. So, um, one of the organizers of this program told me to keep it simple, and it's just not possible. There's nothing simple about annual plasticulture strawberry production. So, I'm going to be hitting the highlights. I totally expect you to have more questions than answers at the end of this, but hopefully, it'll give you a good overview of things to think about, places to go, resources that you have at your disposal. So I'm gonna start out with giving you those resources right away, and honestly, I feel like after about these first three slides, you can just cut it off, and you'll have everything you need to be successful. But smallfruits.org, that's our small fruit consortium that all of the universities in the Southeast contribute to, and they are awesome resources for everything around small fruits, not just strawberries, blueberries, blackberries. Everything is covered in there. I want to bring your attention to this IPM guide. They update this yearly. This thing needs to be printed off and put on your dashboard. It's an excellent resource, and it goes through all the different pest issues that you potentially could encounter, from soil-borne diseases, weeds, insects, and foliar diseases as well. Another one is the production guide. Especially if you're a new grower, this is going to be very important. It does a good job of laying out what to expect in a month by month schedule, and it'll really help you from making some costly missteps. The third link down here is the strawberry budgets. This one's put out by North Carolina State University. I think that'll give you a good overview of what you're looking at as far as expenses and potential income. The Virginia Tech Small Fruits website, awesome resource. Links to a lot of the things that I've already mentioned, as well as others, and you can find variety trial data and all kinds of information there to help base your decisions. The MyIPM app. If you got a smartphone and you're growing fruit, you need this app. Period. It breaks it down crop by crop, disease by disease, insect by insect. It has a tutorial by a specialist telling you what you should be seeing in the field if you're experiencing this issue. It shows excellent pictures, and they have recommendations on control measures, both OMRI certified as well as conventional list. And since this video is coming at a good time, I'm going to do a shameless plug for some programs we got coming up. The MidAtlantic strawberry programs are going to be here in Virginia Beach, February 28th and March 1st. These are 3 programs done over the course of 2 days. We start with our field walk, which is on farm, in field, with the specialist. A lot of one-on-one interaction. You get time spent with growers. It's really a good opportunity for all of us to get together. The evening program is going to be focused on fumigation training and certification this year. This is something, if you are a fumigator or you're going to fumigate, you need to have this on top of your private applicator's license to do that. And this is something that needs to be done every 3 years. The Strawberry School and Trade Show, that's the next day. Every aspect of strawberry production will be covered somehow. And we have some awesome sponsors and vendors there. So the suppliers that you need to make your operation successful, a lot of them will be there at the meeting. So anyhow, that's all I got for the shameless plug. So annual plasticulture strawberry production was originally developed in California. It was kind of the perfect storm of multiple technologies coming on about the same time. It combined drip irrigation and fertigation along with the use of plastic mulch and raised beds. But probably the most important part of making strawberries an annual system from a perennial system was the development of the Chandler variety. You can't just use the old matted row varieties on plastic and expect to have good success. You need to have the ones that are developed for plasticulture. And Chandler is case in point, one of those varieties. Requires a significant capital investment. You know, you'll easily spend 7,000-9,000 establishment costs. So this is before you get to harvest. And you know, there's great potential for profit in the system if everything goes your way, but it's not for somebody to jump in and just halfway manage. You really have to manage this crop intensively. A lot of things to consider. And just like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to have time to do this properly, but these are all things that you need to be thinking about if you're going to grow strawberries successfully. So site selection, you know, since this program was designed for warmer climates, I'll just say it's not being used just in warmer climates. There's areas of the U.S. that are using this. I know growers in Ohio, I know growers in Indiana, even some farther north that are using this very successfully. So it can be used pretty much everywhere in the Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and you can do it justice. So picking your site, field location is important, orientation, soil type, air drainage, water drainage, all that's important. I'll touch on a little bit of all that. So I should have mentioned in the beginning, you know, Alan Straw was a major part of putting this together back in 2017. Alan had a great statewide perspective where I'm pretty much just in the coastal southeast tip of Virginia. So I'll mention a few things when we talk about slope and rocks and stuff like that that are out of my wheelhouse, but I think it's important to mention. So wind breaks on the north or northwest side would be a good thing to prevent cold injury. Proximity to water, you know, you got to irrigate. There's no way with a plastic covered root zone that you can depend on anything at all from Mother Nature. So you're going to have water supply, at least for drip. Depending on your plant type choices and your frost protection choices, you may need large volumes of water for overhead irrigation. And of course, if you're a U-pick operation, you want to be visible from the road and have easily accessibility. So I got here that field orientation sort of matters. We used to talk more strongly about the northwest orientation. It does encourage more uniform plant development as well as the ripening of the berries. But I know quite a few growers that don't have that opportunity and they have east-west rows and are very successful with it. So I'm mentioning it, but it's not a deal breaker. So a south-facing slope, warms sooner, you know, creates an earlier harvest advantage, and then a disadvantage is the earlier potential for frost protection. North-facing slopes, basically the opposite of that. So ideally, a northeast or southeast facing slope would be the choice. Soil type, again, I'm talking about it, but it's being done successfully in all different soil types. Sandy loam, clay loam is probably preferable, 100%. And that's mainly for drainage. The strawberries don't like to have wet feet, so something that doesn't drain as well and holds moisture better is not as ideal, but it can still be done. Rocks, of course, will be problematic for poking holes in your drip tape and your plastic. Air drainage, something to consider. You know, you don't want to be planting these things in a cold pocket that would just make your frost protection job that much more intensive. So that's just something to think about. Water drainage, especially if you're using overhead irrigation, is going to be important because you're dumping a pile of water on these fields, and you don't want that ponding. Super saturated beds because of ponding just lead to disease issues and death of your plants. Steep slopes, it's not perfect by any means. Ideally, you'd be trying to work on a contour with less slope, and that'll help with your flow, your drip irrigation, because that's a low PSI system. You're not exceeding about 8 to 10, 12 pounds on your drip system, so you can't really do a whole lot of forcing over a steep ridge or anything like that. Soil sampling. So if you're thinking about doing strawberries, you need to get on this right away. 6 months prior to transplanting would be ideal. So if you got a pH issue, that'll allow time for that lime to do its job. I'm saying here to sample about 6 to 8 inches deep. That's deeper than what you and I have been taught. But if you think about how big of a bed we're trying to get, it takes that amount of soil to make that bed. So, you want your sample and your analysis done on something that's representative of what you're using. So that's the recommendation. Got a little video here I'm gonna play. So this is us preparing our beds. We've already done our pre-plant fertility. We've worked the ground. We've gotten rid of every bit of organic matter and residue that could possibly be decomposed. And in order to get a nice tight plastic with good, I guess, connection to the soil, I prefer to go in pre-bed. So I'm not laying plastic. I'm not running the drip. I'm not running the fumigant. I've even got my cover-up blades blocked up, and I'm just going to pull that bed one time, turn around at the other end, and then I'm going to lay my plastic drip and all that stuff. And this is a way that I feel like you can be successful at getting a good tight bed this way. Let me show you. So if you're coming into fallow land, you need to really think about this a good bit ahead of time and start plowing that land and working that ground and getting rid of that excess residue. If it comes time to bed and you haven't done a good job of getting rid of that, it's going to be problematic in making your beds. If you make your beds and then that stuff decomposes, you're going to see where the beds will slough off, and you'll have loose plastic, which windy conditions will help that plastic pull out of the ground, and it's just problematic all the way around. So your goal is to get rid of that residue as quickly as possible, and it takes time. So think about that ahead of time. Work the soil deeply, remove the excess debris. So anyhow, kind of what we just discussed. Large rocks would be a problem. So anything you can get out of the field would be a good thing. On your fall fertility, of course, use a soil sample, your soil test to base that application. A rule of thumb is coming in with about half of your nitrogen requirements in the fall, and then all of your phosphorus and potassium. Boron is something that's important to a strawberry, and so you need to make sure you're applying some boron. This is just an example of a blend that we've used here in the coastal plain, and our area, we don't have a whole lot of fertilizer suppliers, so we had to pool our orders between growers and get our custom blends made. So it may not be exactly what anybody's soil test recommended, but it's what we got to do to be able to get what we want. If you're going to fumigate, your nitrogen source is really important. You're going to want at least half of the nitrogen you're putting down readily available right away, because that fumigant has taken out all the soil microbes that would be digesting the other forms of nitrogen into something that the plant can uptake. Another thing I'll mention, I don't think it's represented here, but on hot days under plastic, muriate of potash can gas off and actually hurt the plant, burn the plant. So we recommend using sulfate of potash as your potassium source. Got another little video here that's going to kind of show you my fumigation rig and talk a little bit about that. So if you're going to fumigate, there's a couple choices these are the most commonly used fumigants. So right now, Pichlor 60%, 60% chloropicrin, 40% telone, telone C35, which is basically those percentages reversed. Advantages one over the other. Maybe Pichlor 60 would do a tad better on weed seed control, where the telone C35 might have a tad advantage on nematodes. These are all things that are discussed in that IPM guide that I mentioned in the very first slide. So this I feel is extremely important, especially if somebody is going into this for the first time. You got to know your history of the ground. What happened here is some herbicide was applied to a previous crop that really worked and damaged these strawberries. So you got to know what was put down before. You got to research it. You got to look at the label. You look for the plant back restrictions. A lot of times you won't even see strawberry listed as a crop on the plant back table. So that means you use the other crops section of that table, and that could easily be 18 months and even longer. So, you don't want to put that money out and then have a failure. So a couple pictures of the bedding equipment that's used. You want something that's going to do a 6 to 8 inch tall bed. The 3 to 4 inch bedders that a lot of vegetable farms use, to me, aren't adequate for strawberries. When you got a harvest time frame of like 6 weeks or better, the last berries that are being produced will have 6, 8, 10 inch long stem on them, and under right weather conditions, that berry ripening on moist soil during rainy conditions is not a good thing. So the taller the bed, the more forgiveness you get on that aspect. Plus, you're getting the extra warming capabilities in the spring to set you up for success. None of the bedders are made to plow the ground. These are only made to pull in the soil that's there and form that bed. So you got to do all your prep work, your deep plowing ahead of this machine. If you're trying to use this machine as a plow and a bed maker, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so a little bit on the drip irrigation, you're going to want at least a 10 mil thick drip tape. Place it about 1 inches deep. Most folks get away with one drip line per bed. If you got deep sandy soils, you may want to consider 2 drip lines per bed. Not all bedders are set up to do 2 drip lines. The plastic mulch, 5 foot is the standard on the width, 1.25 mil. If you're fumigating, you'll be using totally impermeable film. If you're not, you can get away with the standard film, which might be a tad cheaper. Black, of course, is what you're going to have for this program. So cover crop. A lot of people will utilize a annual ryegrass or perennial ryegrass as a cover crop in the row meadows. This will be spread over top of the plastic after you've laid it, and I recommend going and blowing the excess seed off of the plastic. If you don't, you can see birds get in there, poke little holes, and then you got grass growing out of the holes. So it's something that both helps outcompete the broadleafs, which are harder to control, and then gives you something that's easy to control later on in the spring when it's time to kill that grass up. Transplanting, you're going to be doing double rows on your plastic, 12 to 15 inches between the rows, and then 12 to 15 inches in between the plants in the row. Varieties, I'm going to mention 3 here in a minute, but there's a lot out there, and you really need to have some idea of how you're going to market this crop to guide your variety choices. So Chandler, there's more acres of Chandler in the state than any other variety. It does consistently year after year in multiple areas. You know, it's pretty much good everywhere. It has the potential for large fruits. Some years it also will put on way too many crowns than it needs, and that'll equate to a lot more blooms, which equates to a lot more strawberries, which usually leads to smaller strawberries. And in strawberries, size matters. So Camarosa, 100% better than Chandler if you're going to be a wholesale operation where you're picking these things and shipping them. For a U-pick, they're not foolproof by any means. You'll have a hard time educating your consumer on when they're properly harvest these things. So on a cool day, beginning of the season, they've got to be a purple color before they're actually fully ripe. What I consider a red ripe strawberry that we all like to pick and eat, for a Camarosa to taste good, it's going to have to be probably about middle of the season, and the weather's got to be really good and warm. But it's one to consider. It's not as consistent as the Chandler. Sweet Charlie, it's a good strawberry. It comes out of the Florida plant breeding side, so it's resistant to anthracnose. It does have a slightly greater chance at having some issues with Phytophthora. To me, it's one that benefits by being planted earlier. It will give you a slight advantage on harvest time because it'll start coming on and ripening up before a Chandler and a Camarosa, but your yield is significantly less. So on a small acre situation, I'd never recommend this one as like your only or your main variety. So types of transplanting, time of transplanting, Chandler and Camarosas here would be about September 30th, more higher elevations about September 15th. Sweet Charlie would benefit by going in about two weeks earlier than those dates. I will say that, these are good dates for reference, but since our new normal is abnormal, they're not hard and fast anymore. We commonly plan as late as the end of the first week of October here, and have been doing well with that, getting our needed growth in the fall. So there's many types of transplants. These are the only 2 that I'm going to mention, and especially for a new grower, probably the only 2 to consider. And I'm really going to sway you towards the plug plants, I hope. But bare root plants, they're not as common as they used to be. When I started 22 years ago, this was the plant type of choice. But you had to overhead irrigate these things every daylight hour from planting through the first week, because the first thing a bare root plant wants to do when you transplant it is fall over. And if it falls over on black plastic and it's sunny conditions, it's going to burn up and die. So if you use bare roots, you're going to have a system for overhead irrigation. Plug plants, they're pretty easy to plant, easy to establish. The water wheel transplanter will poke the hole. You put the plant in the hole, put a smearing of soil over top of the root ball, and the rest can be managed through drip irrigation. Some growers will still use the overhead for 30-40 minutes after transplanting to get that good washing around that root ball and trying to guarantee success there. But a lot do it with just drip. So like I mentioned before, this used to be the predominant type of plant, the bare root plant. They come from Canada to us directly. This just tells you a little bit more about how that's done. There are some advantages Well, there's one advantage, which is the price. They are harder to transplant. It's all done by hand. It takes a lot of meticulous learning on that, because you want that crown of the strawberry plant perfectly placed in the soil. Too deep, too shallow are both just recipes for problems. Plug plants, again, easier to establish and hard to go wrong. If you start with a clean plug plant, if you have something that's diseased or comes in with some insect issues, those are the two biggest issues that you might run into with plugs. They are more expensive by a long shot. So frost protection, you're going to have to make decisions around frost protection, because you need to be able to frost protect to be successful. So you got to determine, am I going to use overhead? Am I going to use row covers? Am I going to have the ability to do both? That's some thought process, depending on where you're at, needs to happen to make those decisions. But if you're going to use water for frost protection, overhead irrigation, that's going to, again, throw out the importance of drainage, because that's a lot of water that's going out there, and it needs to run off. It doesn't need to be ponded in the field. And just so you know, when you start up your overhead irrigation for frost protection, you'll start forming ice, and then that water hitting that ice creates friction, and that friction creates heat. So that's the premise around how the overhead irrigation will keep that strawberry plant and strawberry bloom from reaching the critical killing temperature. And once you start your overhead system, you're going to run it continuously until you're not making ice, or you're not maintaining ice anymore. So if you choose to go with row covers, there are some advantages there, because by having the row covers, if you plant late in the fall, or your fall's not as warm as you expected it to be, you have an opportunity to apply those row covers and increase your growth in the fall, which is greatly needed on some varieties. There's growing degree day requirements that some varieties need that can be met with the use of row covers under certain conditions. And then, of course, if you use it in the spring, that would be for the frost protection. Some areas outside of ours in Virginia will leave row covers on all winter long to reduce the incidences of desiccation on the plants as well. I'll bring your attention to the 1.25. That, in my mind, is your sweet spot everywhere. You're not sacrificing as much on light transmission, and it's a good weight to get some insulation on those nights when you got to frost protect. And so in other areas, you might have the need for these thicker ones, but for our area of the state, the 1.25 is most ideal. And that you could probably draw a 2-hour circle around us, and that should be a good rule of thumb for row covers. So tissue sampling, that's a very important thing to do. Not all growers take the time to do it, but it helps take the guesswork out of your spring fertility. It tells you exactly what you need to what you need to apply. And there's some fertility issues that you just can't tell from a naked eye. Nitrogen to sulfur ratio would be one of them. Another would be the need to put down Epsom salts for either sulfur or magnesium requirements. Though, by the time you notice that stuff with the naked eye, some damage has been done. So I highly recommend tissue sampling. It's not too costly. North Carolina Department of Agriculture is a great place to send these. I recommend doing them on a Monday or a Tuesday. That way you can send them there, they can process them, and you should have your results by the end of that work week. The nutrients in the plant are something that are highly mobile, and just a little bit of clouds will change the analysis. So you want to do it on a sunny time of the day, and you want to do it at the same time every time you send a sample. So you're always comparing apples to apples. So I recommend 12 to 1 o'clock on a sunny day on Monday or Tuesday. This is just some of the sufficiency ranges. All this is at the North Carolina Department of Agriculture Tissue Lab website. I'm not going to spend any time on that. A couple questions about fertilizing. How often do I fertilize? Do I do it every week, every 2 weeks? You know, how much fertilizer? So at least do it every week. There's no reason to go and put down 2 weeks worth of fertilizer at one time. More than likely, you're going to have to run that drip irrigation system many more times to help leach that out. And then, you know, what have you done? They haven't got what you planned for them to get. Some soils require less fertilizer more often. I'll give you an example. I've got 2 U-picket farms. One's on a nice sandy loam soil. I can fertigate that once a week during the spring, no problems. I've also got a clay soil. It's a silt clay. It's another U-picket farm. That one, we do it 3 times a week. So a third, a third, a third. And since doing that, we've seen a whole lot better results with our plant growth and our quality on our fruit. So an example of fertility in the spring, you could use calcium nitrate 1 week, then the following week potassium nitrate, and continue that rotation on. But there's many different ways to do this, and this is just one example. So I'm not going to get into this a whole lot, but irrigation, you know, you got to decide whether you're going to do overhead irrigation or not. If you're not, then bare roots are off the table, right? No reason to consider them. And then you're going to do plugs. If you're going to have overhead irrigation, you got those 2 decisions. And then also deciding whether you want to use row covers for frost protection or not. I should say that, you know, for a single operator, overhead irrigation is a whole lot more user friendly. You flip a switch, you babysit it all night. As far as frost protection, we're on the row covers. You pull the row covers, you go to bed and forget it. But pulling row covers by yourself is not an easy task. So it needs to be an operation that has either workers or family to help with that. It needs a few people to deploy row covers in a timely manner. So if you're not going to tissue analysis, you're going to be basing your applications on about 7 pounds of N per week is what I would say. The only time I would go to 10 is if I had a really robust crop and felt like they needed it, but I'd really want to back myself up with a tissue analysis. So there's just some basics on irrigation, ballpark kind of stuff. We might have touched on this already, but as far as weed control in the beds, fumigation is probably the primary way. There are some herbicides now that are labeled to go on a bed top application, but you've got to place those application equipment on your bedder because you got to catch it right after the bed's been made and before the plastic goes down, because you can't have any disturbance of the soil once you've applied that herbicide, or that barrier is not worth anything to you. For your row middles, the ryegrass again is a good choice, easily controlled in the spring with clethodim or siloxodim. Stinger is about the only herbicide that is labeled for over-the-top control of any broadleafs, and it primarily does good on vetch, and that's all. So insect control, you know, you're going to scout and apply protectants or control measures when thresholds have been reached. I'll show a couple insects, and by far this is not inclusive of everything. So mites, that's something that probably half of the growers, half of the years have to spray for mites. We've got more mites coming on than just spider mites. So you need to pay attention to that IPM guide. All of that information is going to be for you in there. Bud weevil or clipper, if you got wooded areas around your strawberries, this is something that you probably will see. A lot of times the strawberries will compensate for the damage and you won't really know you've lost anything, but the timing of their infestation sometimes can be problematic. You know, if you lost all your buds right before what would have been your Mother's Day crop, that's not a good thing. Even if it compensates for it and you have it, you know, the first week of June, that's not a equivalent thing. So keep an eye out for them. They'll pierce the connection there between right at the bottom of the bloom, and as those egg of the clipper matures, that bloom will just dry up and fall off. So I'm not mentioning a whole lot of diseases. The main two that we see in the spring are going to be botrytis and anthracnose. One thing you can do culturally is remove the dead plant material, get rid of all those old leaves, because that's where those diseases would sporulate. And just like humans, you know, it's easier to keep a strawberry from getting sick than to cure it once it's sick. So preventative sprays is going to be the way to go, no matter what your management model is. And I'm going to refer you back to that Small Fruit Consortium IPM guide. Pictures of the gray mold on strawberries. Here it is on the leaf. This is the stuff you try and prevent by pulling all that desiccated material out of the plants and hopefully out of the field before the strawberries start blooming. This is just a picture of anthracnose fruit rot. That black spot will show up on the strawberry and it'll continue to get worse and encompass the whole berry. Of course, you know, even at this stage is unmarketable. The crown rot, I'm only showing you anthracnose crown rot because it's probably the only one that I feel like visible symptoms can be a good indication. If you see this marbling in the crown, kind of like the marbling in a steak, that's something that's usually a telltale sign of anthracnose crown rot. But 100% always best to get with your local agent, get a sample sent to the lab, and find out for sure. So just a cool picture of a plug propagation outfit showing you how it's done outside. This is something back when plug started was all done inside the greenhouse with misters, and you continually had a lot of leaf disease issues where outside it's more cost effective, plus it's more healthier plug in the end. And that's about it. Again, I'm sure you got more questions than answers. Here's my contact information. Love to talk to you, help you however I can. I obviously didn't go into pricing, packaging, you know, many things on that list, but been a pleasure and I appreciate your attention, and have a good one.